This is Taranis AcreForward, the ag industry's most thought-provoking podcast. Listen to interesting people as we go in-depth into the issues affecting crop advisors, growers, and farm communities, uncovering the truth about the ag business and using technology to prepare for the unforeseeable. Ready to explore the future? Let's dig in.
Welcome to the AcreForward Podcast. I'm Cory Edge, your host for today's episode, and we're diving into an initiative. It's not only important to our team at Taranis, but also to the agricultural industry at large, and that is conservation. Well, we're thrilled to have today Tom Buman, our newly appointed Director of Sustainability here at Taranis. And Tom's going to share some insights into what's on the horizon for 2025 and how Taranis is making conservation funding more accessible and impactful for growers. So, Tom, thank you for being here today. And, alongside myself and our guests, I'm sure we'd all love to know a little bit more about yourself, your background in conservation, and what led you to join Taranis.
Okay. Well, my background, I'm a farm kid from Southwest Iowa. Went to Iowa State, got my agronomy degree, and out of college, I started working for USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. And so, they're the agencies that tasked with working with farmers on private lands. And so I worked with them for 14 years and got some really good background. After resigning from NRCS, I started my own business. My brother Stan and I, we started our business, Agrin, and we ran that for 22 years. After the 22-year period, we sold our business to Land O'Lakes for their sustainability platform. And then I did a couple contracting jobs and was looking to get back into sustainability and was contacted by Taranis because of my background in conservation and, landed the job about 3 or 4 months ago.
That's great. I think as a fellow Big 12 alumnus, at Texas Tech, we often talk about, football programs maybe haven't quite been what they used to be, but we always get a nice spirited competition for basketball season. So looking forward to that coming up too.
There you go.
So Tom, obviously you've got a wealth of experience in the industry and, whether we all like it or not, conservation flows through your veins, and your knowledge, I think, is so important. But you've seen a lot of change that have happened probably over the course of your career. So based on your experience, what are some of those significant changes that growers have faced and are facing when it comes to finding and applying for conservation funding?
Well, I think when I first started, the focus was really on, when I worked for NRCS, was really on technical support, is getting out and helping farmers understand what different conservation practices really made a difference on their farm. And so we can talk about conservation practices, but every farm is a little bit different. Every region is a little bit different. It requires different things. And depending on a farmer's outlook, obviously that influences what practices they need to implement. And then I think we've migrated into, we know what most of the conservation practices are, and we've talked to farmers about what they are. I think now we're entering one of the most exciting periods of conservation that I've seen, and that's because we've really seen, along with the technical assistance, some really substantial financial assistance available to farmers. And, there's always been this kind of baseline level of funding for conservation programs. And when I talk about conservation programs for private lands, I'm really talking about the EQIP program and the CSP, or the Conservation Stewardship Program. But there's always been this kind of baseline level of funding, and the money always gets used up. There's always plenty of interest from the farming community to sign up for programs and utilize all the funding. Well, in the 2022, with the Inflation Reduction Act, obviously that really focused on climate change and mitigating kind of issues with climate change. Agriculture has a lot to do with that. They have a significant impact on how we can mitigate changes in our changing climate. And so a lot of the money, or a significant amount of the money in the Inflation of 2022 was put into conservation programs for climate mitigation options like no-till and cover crops and reduced nitrogen use. And so what we've seen is that we have almost, by 2026, we will triple our baseline funding available to farmers to sign up for programs. And what that means is we have far more funding available to us last year, this year, next year, the year following, to really go out and get farmers signed up for conservation practices. We know what the practices are they need. Now we have the funding to really go to work and encourage them and incentivize them to put these practices on the ground. And so it's a really exciting time. And then if you combine that with kind of the outlook on commodity prices that, not very favorable. We kind of have low commodity prices and facing relatively high input prices. Farmers are looking for an additional source of income. And I think looking at these conservation programs as that additional source really makes this an exciting time.
So along with the practices that are available for those folks, and there are some new things, that have become now a part of what funds are available. How much education do you think goes into that? From your standpoint of practices that growers may already be doing today that they may not realize they qualify for, but then how much of this is really kind of spreading the word about what's available to growers?
Well, a lot of it is spreading the word, right? When you spend all the money that you get, there's no sense of doing a whole lot of outreach from an agency standpoint, right? You're going out and you're getting good practices done. And so your typical kind of way of doing business is good enough to allocate all the money. But with the increased funding, I think it's really important that we realize that the funding is out there and we need to get farmers signed up. And so really spreading the word is important. And I think the other part of this is helping farmers understand the program and what's available. I mean, the NRCS, they're just a bit overwhelmed with all the work that they have to do. And, it's through no fault of their own when you triple your funds and you have kind of the same workforce. There's a lot of work with all the contracting process and getting the word out and everything. And then from a farmer standpoint, it's just a lot to understand. I mean, I've worked with these programs all my life and they change sometimes from year to year. You have different practices that are available. Sometimes offices will focus on one or two practices and not necessarily talk about other practices. And sometimes because in their mind, that's not as important in their region. But these practices are available to farmers, and understanding what's available is really, really important. And so at Taranis, we really want to help a farmer understand what's available, what the different programs mean, and then how they get involved. And what we really want to do is make the process simple for them. I was with a producer last week and we were talking through the process and he's like, I would pay somebody to help do the paperwork. Like I get in these programs and I get so frustrated with it that I would rather just have somebody help me, even if it costs some money. And so to give you an example, there's two different programs that I talked about. The EQIP program, which is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and then the CSP program, which is this Conservation Stewardship Program. We all have acronyms for everything, right?
That's
But
right.
the EQIP program is largely a program that is focused after farmers that haven't done a specific practice. So if you haven't done cover crops before, you can sign up for EQIP and do EQIP. Now, if you have done cover crops before, depending on what you want to do, you might go over into the CSP program, because CSP program is a program that pays farmers for what they've already done. And so if you think about a couple of years ago, largely we put all of our money into paying farmers for doing something new. We want to incentivize farmers for doing new practices. And we never really put any money into helping support farmers that have been doing it for years, because if we want to make a change and all we do is pay farmers for what they've already done, we really don't make a change. We have to incentivize farmers for what they haven't done. But then we developed the CSP program, or the Conservation Stewardship Program, that put money into supporting farmers for what they've done for years. So we have two pools of money. And you would think that would be easy, but it's not quite that easy, because if you go back to the cover crop issue that NRCS has under EQIP, and say a farmer is already doing something, there are different levels of cover crops that a farmer can do. And if he did a lower level, he can sign up for a higher level and still get approved through EQIP. And the best payments are through the EQIP program. So if somebody is eligible through the EQIP program, we want to encourage farmers to sign up for that. But if they're not eligible for EQIP because they've been doing something for a long time, then we wanted to get them into CSP. And so it's just the level of understanding is, where do I need to go? And I think that's what Taranis really helps farmers, is navigate what are all the practices you might be interested in, what are the payment levels, what are the maximum rates you can get, how do we maximize your benefits of a conservation program, which program should you be in, what practices you should use, and then help you sign up for those and then navigate the paperwork. And if you have questions, you can come to us and get answers.
I think the key takeaway there, Tom, is simplifying the process and increasing the opportunity to then receive those funds. And I think when you break it down in the way that you did, and the hardest part is making sure that the paperwork is complete and filled out correctly. What then we have experts like you is to help with those practices and really understand the farming operation and what things are going to be easier to make changes on versus things that they've been doing that maybe they haven't capitalized on in the past. So I like the mix of those things and how it works together. And I do want to go back to something you said earlier, which I think kind of leads us into another point of discussion, is what conservation opportunities in today's landscape looks like. So you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 and how that created some exciting new opportunities for farmers to adopt conservation practices. Can you explain a little bit deeper on how this legislation opens doors for funding and then some of the challenges farmers may face, getting access to it?
Sure. So, that the largest thing the Inflation Reduction Act did is significantly increase the amount of funding that's available to farmers and ranchers across the United States. And that's they didn't create any new programs, they didn't create any new practices, but NRCS has a whole suite of conservation practices that they can cost share on. And by increasing the level of funding, you can go back to practices maybe that are a little lower priority or maybe haven't been a priority in the past, and because of additional funding, tap into some of those practices and get those approved. And so I think it's not that the Inflation Reduction Act created any new programs. There's not any new programs that I know of, but providing additional funding and getting more farmers to sign up. And I think from our standpoint is that there are farmers that have never worked with these programs in the past. And so when you put additional dollars out there, there are farmers that are like, hey, maybe I should pay attention to this. I don't really know what EQIP and CSP are. Is there somebody to help me guide through the process and understand this? And not everybody is like, feels always comfortable going into a government office and working with them. NRCS is a great agency, but not everybody is totally comfortable going and working with them and understanding the programs. And so from our standpoint, being able to help farmers understand what they're eligible for, how the ranking system works, where they can go to get extra points and improve their ranking, what practices are available that might pay the most dollars and fit into their program. I think we can add that higher level of service. And then just navigating the paperwork. My gosh, there's, when somebody signs up for through our program, we have 5 forms that they sign off immediately. And we've done it so that it's DocuSign. It takes 5 or 10 minutes to do it. They get emailed all the different forms. But we have worked really hard at Taranis to streamline it, to walk farmers through. And what they have to do is implement the practice, right? They sign up for a practice, they have to do it. But and they do that well, right? They do nutrient management, they do cover crops, they do, whatever it is they sign up for. They can work with their local ag retailer and get the information for it. What we do is help streamline the process of the reporting and the sign up and payments and everything else.
Yes, and I think too, there's a point where we talk about sometimes in agriculture, farmers just put their heads down and go to work, and they don't always look for opportunities, whether that's through different modes of getting funding or things like that, and really I think part of it is because as these programs come to life, there's a lot of misconceptions, like you mentioned, of the fear of walking into that government agency, or just how long is this going to take me, and things like that. So breaking down the process and simplifying it, like we've talked about, is really, really key, and making sure that growers feel comfortable with this. So another question that I thought was interesting, as we kind of were visiting about opportunities with what things look like today with conservation, what practices in your mind are most likely to be funded under programs like the IRA, for example? Is there just a host of these are the top line items versus others?
Yeah, so of course, IRA is focused on climate change. And so the practices that impact climate change or mitigate climate change are the ones that they're really looking for IRA funding, or looking to approve through IRA. You can say cover crops, because we're sequestering carbon into the soil and improving soil health. Is that excellent practice? No-till, same thing. We're not tilling up the soil, and we're really keeping that soil so that the carbon stays in place. Nutrient management, especially nitrogen management, we're reducing the amount of commercial fertilizer, down to land-grant university recommendations, because then we don't have to manufacture that, which takes, energy to manufacture. And then there's also the release of it, where we have some released into the atmosphere in greenhouse gases. And so those are really the important ones for cropland. But there's other ones like pest management, and it's kind of a whole slew of other type of practices. We're putting grass out there. But the 5 practices that Taranis largely focuses on is pest management, nutrient management, cover crops, no-till, and then what we call a conservation cropping system. And I would say conservation cropping system is where you might be interested in changing your crop rotation, and interested in putting maybe a third crop into your rotation. And, so I was down in Kansas talking to some farmers down there, and they're worried about their groundwater situation. And so some of them are considering putting a year of wheat into their rotation to conserve, over the length of their rotation, conserve water. And so I think there's an opportunity to say, hey, if I'm thinking about changing my crop rotation, maybe there's an opportunity to get an incentive payment to offset maybe some of the loss that I have if I perceive that I have a loss by adding a crop into it.
And it's certainly going to vary by state, right? And
Absolutely.
What those things mean for your specific geography or soil type, or what's available to you from a resource standpoint, and those things. So let's get a little bigger picture now. We've talked about the funds that are available, right?
Uh-huh.
We've never seen dollars like this that are available for growers to capture, and we've talked about just the importance of in low commodity price years, it's important to go and look for alternative, sources of income.
Right.
Those two things aside, why else do you think it's a critically important time for farmers to start engaging with conservation programs?
Well, I think the kind of the emphasis on soil health that we've had in the last 5 to 10 years has really led us to the point where we are creating a more resilient farming system. So I don't think anybody can argue the variability in our agricultural landscape, the weather variability has significantly changed over the last 15 or 20 years. And we need to, I think it's what scientists would call build resilience into our system. So whether we have too much rain or not enough rain, we have hot weather, cold weather, we're building some kind of resilience in that buffers those kind of extremes. I think in the past we've been able to kind of get by and say, hey, we have a pretty consistent climate. We know it's going to happen next year. I think to a certain extent, some of that's gone. And so building a healthy soil that can hold more water in times of drought or, in times of heat stress or something like that. I think it's really important to start looking at those. And I think the science of soil health has really exploded and really helped us understand how by doing cover crops or how by doing no-till, we can build resilience into our agricultural system. And I just think of just being good stewards of the land. I was raised by a dad who believed in soil conservation and believed in water quality. And, he wanted practices out there because it was more than just about himself, right, and his land. It was about the neighbors and the downstream people. And it was just very important for him to know that he was a good steward of his land. And so I think there are different motivating factors for different people. There's not a one size fits all, but I think, the economy and looking for extra dollars to put in to your farm income, the stewardship part of it, the resilience part, a lot of things that farmers can look at and say, hey, maybe it's time I start thinking about conservation in a different way.
Yeah, and we've really been tasked with that ideology from the fact that there obviously there's no more land being created anywhere. In fact, in a lot of ways, there's being land taken away when it comes to what's tillable out there and where we can grow these crops.
Yeah.
And we're asking growers, in large part, to do more with less. And so these type of practices and having the mindset of, really taking the best care that we can of the soil that we're, ultimately being asked to have livelihoods built off of and supporting communities that it's an integral part of a farming operation. And so these conservation practices certainly aid in that effort. So
Yeah. There's no question in our soil health, right? The best soil we have is at the top, and that's what gets eroded next, right? The next
mhm.
rainstorm we lose the best topsoil. I mean, we've already lost the best topsoil that we've had. I mean, a lot of studies show that we've lost between 25 and 50% of our topsoil, and that's the best of the best. That is the top topsoil. And every time we lose another layer of topsoil, we're losing the next best layer of topsoil. And so it's just really important to say, hey, at some point in time, I need to curb my soil erosion in order to preserve what I have left.
Exactly. Yes. So Tom, we've talked a lot about Taranis conservation. I think we've hinted around the idea of what it is that we're trying to accomplish, but give us the overview. What is Taranis? You helped build this idea out. So what is Taranis conservation? What do we do, and what services are provided to growers?
So I would say I would describe it as we're a third party entity that helps farmers from cradle to grave in implementing these conservation practices. So we typically work with ag retailers, but some people come in, independent of an ag retailer. But an ag retailer might talk to some of their customers and say, you know, hey, are you interested in knowing more about EQIP and CSP? When they get somebody that says, yeah, I'd like to know more about it for whatever the reason is, the ag retailer turns that farmer name over to us. And then we call them up, talk to them a little bit, and we talk to them about, the level of involvement. And if they're interested, we have them sign forms and DocuSign. They go through and they DocuSign it. And there is no commitment at this point in time. These are just forms that say, hey, I want to get everything taken care of so I'm in the line for funding. Because typically NRCS has these cutoff dates. You want to get your application in. I would call it a letter of intent. It's an application for funding to say, if I'm in before this date, I'm in this pool of people that they're going to rank and they're going to approve out of this pool of people. They're going to go down the ranking system till they run out of money and they're going to approve those people. And those people, those are the farmers that are going to move forward. So we want to make sure we get farmers signed up as soon as possible. If you don't get signed up for this year, we roll your application over into next year where there will even be more funding. So that's step one, is getting all the application forms in and submitted to NRCS and to FSA. Then we gather some information back from the agencies that help us understand what a farmer's interest might be. We call them up, we do a questionnaire, we talk to them basically for about 20 minutes about what their agronomic system is, how much nitrogen and phosphorus they're putting out. And then it gives us a better idea of, okay, you might be interested in cover crops or no-till, and it helps us steer people in one direction or the other, and it helps us understand what programs they might fit into. Then after we have that information, we call farmers up and we say, hey, here's kind of what we suggest for you, and here's how much money it would amount to. And then if they're interested, then we submit that to NRCS and we say, NRCS, these farmers on these farm, tract, and fields are interested in submitting for these practices. Then NRCS enters that information into their ranking system. It's called CART, or Conservation Assessment Ranking Tool, I think is what CART stands for. And so then based on your geography and your soil types and highly erodible land and kind of a lot of different things, this CART program, it's complicated. There are a lot of things that go into it. But NRCS enters the information, and finally they enter what practices the farmer is interested in, what farm numbers, what tract numbers, what field numbers they're interested in. And then NRCS ranks it. So they have a ranking pool, and they go down so far in the list, and they tell people, hey, you're pre-approved. There is still no obligation on any farmer's point at this point in time. They can back out if they want to. But once that pre-approval is done, then between Taranis and NRCS, we might have to gather a little more information from the farmer, which is going to put us into March and April of next year, this coming year. So there's a lot of time for farmers to think about this after they get signed up. So then once the pre-approval is done, then NRCS will go through and develop contracts. And those contracts will probably be ready to sign, like I said, in March or April of this following year. And so until the farmer signs on the dotted line, there is no obligation on his part. We don't charge him any money. All the work that we do is upfront based on success. Hopefully they sign a contract, they get in. And then we help them write a plan of what they need to do to be eligible for the practice. And so it's one thing to sign up for like nutrient management. There's a whole new level to say, okay, now what do I have to do? Some farmers don't have to do very much. They've been, following the land-grant university's recommendations pretty well for nutrient management, or they're comfortable with cover crops and maybe they've just stepped it up a little bit. And some farmers have to do more than that. That maybe they've not been involved in these practices, but they have to do more to step up. But we write the plan of what they need to do, the nutrient management plan, the pest management plan, whatever it is, and then we give it to them. And then they implement that practice with their ag retailer. So if they need agronomic feedback or RECs or something like that, they can get that from their ag retailer. And then on the back end, kind of what most farmers, like the second part of what they really don't like, is the paperwork part, and that's gathering all the bills and the invoices to prove that they did what they said they would do. So they need their application records for nitrogen. They need their invoices for the seed for their cover crops, if that's what they did. But we help them collect that and get that together so that we can take that and submit it to NRCS so they can get paid. It's only when they get paid that they pay us. So what we do is extract 20% of the value. So when you think from start to end that we've helped them sign up for the forms, we've helped them with the ranking, we've helped them get their conservation plan in place, all the way through to collecting their paperwork and getting it submitted to NRCS so they can get paid. We manage all that, and then at the time they get paid, that's when they pay us. And if they don't get paid, we don't get. They don't. If they don't get paid, they don't pay us. So it is it's almost a no risk situation for them.
And it's a purely success based model.
Absolutely.
And when it comes to success, we have data that shows us, generally speaking, if a grower goes out to apply for conservation funding, they usually have about a 20% or so success rate. Utilizing the processes that we've implemented here with Taranis Conservation Services, that number jumps to about 75%, which if you think about, the difference in and the level of stress we take away, the simplification of the process, and also at the end of the day, we want what's best for these growers, and the practices that they can or should be adopting. We also want what's best for the land as well, and so we're all working in this web together, and I think that's what makes this a really unique program to be involved with.
Right. Yeah, and I think not only do we increase the success rate of getting approved, we can also help them understand what practices are available. And so instead of maybe getting 18 or 20 or $30 an acre, we can get them up in that 50, 60, $70. My brother, who is a very good conservation farmer, he's going to sign up for pest management, nutrient management, and cover crops. And he's up around $150 and $160 an acre. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to get approved for it, and it doesn't mean that he's going to get a contract for it, but he probably initially went from $40 an acre before I started talking to him for signing up for $160 to $170 an acre. Now, when you do that, you have more practices. You need to be apply on your land. You need to be ready to do that. But to really talk through farmers about how they can increase their payment level on a per acre basis, I think is one of the best things that we can.
I also think it's really neat. A lot of people will ask, why is Taranis involved in this conservation services? And if you look at what our intelligence platform is able to provide, there is some practices that really having Taranis intelligence on your acres allows for the unlocking of some of these funds in terms of proof of concept and things like that. So maybe tell us a little bit about that, especially when it comes to pest management.
Yeah, when I came on board, I too kind of wondered, why is Taranis involved? Because I didn't know who Taranis was. I mean, I had a little introduction to him, but I wondered, why are they taking on kind of this third party role? There are other companies out there that do this too, but why is Taranis interested? Then when I started being introduced to their intelligence platform of their drones and going out and scouting fields with drones and being able to see weeds at a very, very early stage and identify their weeds or those insects, and then be able to create a prescription like spot spray or variable rate spray or something like that. I was totally blown away by the service that Taranis could offer to support the implementation of pest management. So if somebody wanted to sign up for pest management, which is really underutilized practice, because even a lot of NRCS people are not very acquainted with how the pest management program works that they pay an incentive program on. And so I was just floored by the level of support that a farmer could get. And so what it really comes down to is Taranis is doing all the scouting if a farmer chooses to get our service. They're providing where the different levels of pests are in their field. They can work with the local agronomist or ag retailer to write a prescription to do it, and then they get paid to do it. And so when you think of like getting maybe up around $45-50 an acre to implement a program, it really is a financial benefit to look at and say, hey, these are guys going to handle all the paperwork for me. They're going to give me all the intelligence of, where my weed problems are, where my insect problems are. I can work with my ag retailer to get a prescription written. And in the end, I get paid for it. I mean, and so as I looked at the pest management, then it made sense to say, okay, what are the other programs that Taranis can help with? Nutrient management, yes, we definitely can help with nutrient management. Cover crops, that's kind of a no-brainer. People want to do cover crops, we can help them walk through that. No-till and kind of then that conservation cropping system. I think those five fit so well underneath the Taranis umbrella.
And you mentioned ag retail. That is our partners that we work with here at Taranis through the retail and cooperative channels is so valuable for us to be able to go hand in hand together to help the mission of making these growers as profitable as possible and giving them the opportunities to utilize tools and resources that make sense to their farming operation. And so as we look at the role of ag retailers when it comes to conservation, how can ag retailers play a role in promoting these monetizable practices, to the farmers they work with? We've got a lot of folks that work in retail, that listen to the show. And so, what is it that they can do in their part, to help their growers that they serve?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of layers to that question. I would encourage any ag retailer that has an interest in conservation and helping farmers access conservation programs to just give us a call and talk to us about the different layers that we can help with. But from an ag retailer, it's been proven over and over in lots and lots of surveys that the most trusted advisor for any farmer is his local ag retailer, right? I mean, if you're going to trust anybody with a recommendation, the most trusted advisor is the ag retailer. And I think this is a real opportunity for an ag retailer to partner and come together. And so, if you think of this kind of Venn diagram of how circles come together and people, like, we have NRCS with, a significant pot of money. It's never going to be enough, but they've got really good funding. Taranis that helps farmers understand what the programs are and walk through it. Ag retailers that understand the practices and recommendations to a farmer and how conservation practices work. And then you have the farmer who's accessing all this information. Like, everything is coming together, I think, in this point in time to really help farmers implement conservation, access the technical help they need through their local ag retailer, who's their most trusted advisor, find money out there, and then have Taranis simplify the process for them. And I think that ag retailers oftentimes have been like, ooh, these programs are out there and we hear how difficult they are. The farmer kind of hears the same thing. I mean, everybody hears their kind of own little sphere, but I think this is an opportunity to bring kind of all four quadrants together and say, like, we can simplify this and we can make this useful. And most importantly, we can get more conservation on the ground.
So if you're an ag retailer out there and you just listened to Tom, preach there for a second about the importance of the role that you play in this Venn diagram of supporting growers, tell us, Tom, what kind of financial time and commitment is required from an ag retailer to support the conservation program?
Um, there's not, I mean, mostly it's what you're already doing, and that's providing agronomic support to a farmer. Now, there's different levels of agronomic support. Obviously, NRCS doesn't pay farmers to do anything they want to do. And so there are qualifications that farmers need to follow. So it might be limiting the nitrogen they put on. And that's always a scary part, right? You're going to tell me how much nitrogen I can put on. Certainly, if you're getting paid to do nutrient management, there are certain guidelines that need to be followed. The ag retailer can help a farmer navigate what those are. Most ag retailers clearly know what land grant universities require or suggest for recommendations. And so it's a lot. They might have to do things a little different. They might have to say, well, if you have very high or high levels of phosphorus and potassium, maybe you don't want to apply any that, this year and next year. Let's kind of milk those down a little bit till we get to an optimum level. But ag retailers, they know what needs to be done. They know the agronomics. We're not really asking them to do anything new. We might have to collect some information from them, like as applied maps or something, to get that to NRCS so we can prove to NRCS that the farmer implemented the practice that they signed up to do. But there's not a lot of involvement other than understanding their place in the agronomic system.
So Tom, I think really as we look and wrap things up here towards the future, what do you see as on? We're very young in this conservation service practice here at Taranis, but what do you see on the horizon for 2025 and as we execute more beyond?
Well, I think two things. First off, anybody signing up and getting approved through EQIP or CSP, they have the opportunity to sign from a 1 to 5 year contract. If they get approved and they move through the process and they agree with anything, they can sign a contract from 1 to 5 years. So, right, this isn't a 1 year at a time. I got to go in, sign up, and get approved and do it. You can write a 5 year contract to say, I want to do these practices. The only thing that's required is as a farmer, I do something the first year, right? I have to do something the first year, but I might want to put off maybe cover crops to year 2 or 3 and then sign up for the rest of the 5 year program. Or I might want to do something for the first couple of years and then not do it for the last couple of years. So there's an opportunity to people get involved that it's not a 1 year process. And so that's exciting for Taranis that we get to help people for multiple years. The other thing is, I think it really depends on where conservation goes into the future and where kind of this idea of third-party technical assistance goes. But I really think Taranis is just set up in a great opportunity to help farmers access funding that's available and to simplify the process. And maybe most importantly, give them tools that make implementing these practices easy. I really like where Taranis is that we're helping farmers with the process of paperwork, but we're really helping them with the process of implementation so they can do what they do best, and that's farm.
So Tom, this is the last question I'll ask you, and this is probably the most difficult. Look into your crystal ball. What does conservation look like over the course of the next decade? How do you see it evolving?
I don't know. Every time I've worked in the conservation arena since 1982, so what, 40 some years, right? And every time I think I have a guess of where it's going, I get surprised. But most of the surprises have been positive for me, and the fact that I have looked at what programs and the practices and the funding that's available, like, it amazes me what the public interest is in helping farmers improve their sustainability. And so, through my career, sure, there have been some ups and downs, but mostly they've been ups in opportunity, of funding and technical assistance. And so I think we see more ag retailers interested. I think we see the public interested in funding these programs. There's certainly a lot of third party like Taranis who are out there helping farmers. And so, I'm an optimistic person, but I think the future looks pretty good.
Well, that is exciting news. Let's hope that you're right. And I think a quote that I've always enjoyed, you say you're an opportunist, or is, don't look at the glass half full, don't look at the glass half empty. Know that there's water in the glass and you have an opportunity to drink it. So I've always thought that is great. And we are living in an age of opportunity to drink the water. So Taranis is here to help with that. And as we close things up, Tom, I can't thank you enough for sharing your insights today. You are a wealth of knowledge and an obvious expert. So it's clear to me at this point that Taranis is leading the way in helping growers adopt sustainable practices and obviously benefiting both financially and with the health of the land that they are farming. So, for more information on the Taranis Conservation Program, you can visit taranis.com/conservation or reach out to your local ag retailer. And don't forget to subscribe to the AcreForward Podcast for more insights on the latest innovations in agriculture. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.